Okay, thanks for coming tonight, everyone. It's great to see so many people here. My name is Carter Dorst, and I am the Executive Director of the Kensington Conservancy. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Kensington Conservancy, we are a not-for-profit charitable land trust located in the St. Joseph Channel area, which is approximately half hour or so east of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. Our main focus is protecting the ecological values of our area. So we acquire property either by purchasing them or receiving donations, and we turn them into nature preserves. So then our responsibility is maintaining those nature preserves. A few of them have hiking trails that we maintain that are open to the public, and we collect data from our properties about what we protect. We do other community stewardship projects such as tree planting and restoration of creeks, stuff like that. We try to do a lot of education, especially for youth. We have summer programs for youth throughout the summer. And yeah, that's what we do. We're funded strictly or primarily through private donations. We have a membership that anyone is welcome to join to help support our work. And one of our education things is doing webinars like you're all here for this evening. So tonight we have a very exciting presentation. We have, let me just bring up my notes here. We have Abby Obenchain. She is a retired natural resources science communication specialist and the communications/public education lead for Clean North, which is an environmental group based out of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. Earlier this year, Abby won a microgrant from the Invasive Species Centre to develop a Sowing and Algoma-focused invasive species plant education program. She is a founding member of the Common Ground at Emmanuel Community Garden in Sault Ste. Marie and an avid gardener and photographer. So I'm going to pass it off to Abby. Thanks for being here for tonight, and take it away.
Excellent. Let me just give me a second to share my screen. Okay, can you hear and see everything okay there, Carter?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, hang on just a sec. Just got to move things around on my screen a little bit. Oh, hang on. It didn't like that. Hang on just a second. Sorry. I started moving things and it didn't like that. Okay, there we go. All right, thanks very much everyone for coming. It's absolutely fantastic to see such a great turnout on a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm really excited to be here, and I hope you all find this presentation interesting and informative. I would like to start by thanking the Kensington Conservancy for hosting and publicizing this event. They are a wonderful organization. I do encourage you to check out their website and learn more about them. And for those in the area who don't know this, they do have hiking trails even, so consider checking that out. Carter did a really good job of introducing me. I just will add a couple of things. One is that my husband and I recently won a Sault Ste. Marie City Beautification Award for our wacky art garden and fence along the west side of our property. So if you're in the area, come by our house at 9 Healy Street and check out our interactive art garden. So my current passion is educating people about invasive garden plants and native plant gardening. As Carter mentioned, last winter I got a microgrant from the Invasive Species Centre here in Sault Ste. Marie to develop a localized invasive plant education program. And we have a long list of partners and supporters, including the Kensington Conservancy. Special thanks to the Invasive Species Centre and Bruce Station Horticultural Society for giving us some funding. This project is in process. We've developed some brochures. We have some web pages about dealing with invasive garden plants and how to get rid of them. And you can find more information about that on the Clean North website. So before I get into growing your own native plants, I wanted to start with a bit of context on invasive plant species, because this is really what led me to winter sowing. So I'll start by defining what is an invasive plant. So an invasive plant is not native to the area in question. So for me, that's Sault Ste. Marie and Algoma. And the introduction of this plant by humans is causing harm to ecosystems, the economy, and or human health. So with the species depicted in these photos, at the far left, we have Japanese knotweed, which is one of the worst invasive species in Sault Ste. Marie. It creates a very dense monoculture with plants that get like 10 feet high. You can see this is the forest floor underneath Japanese knotweed. There's nothing else there. There's no insects. So it's really a bit of an ecological desert situation. In the center photo, I took this picture in London, Ontario, in a natural area inside the city. The understory is dominated by buckthorn. There's no young native trees coming up. It's all buckthorn. So at some point, if the city wants to perpetuate this natural area, it's going to be significant economic cost for them to eradicate the buckthorn and try to get some regeneration of native tree species there. At the far right is bittersweet nightshade. That's a very common invasive plant here in the Sioux. Has pretty purple flowers, but what always concerns me as a mom who used to have young children, it has very vivid, bright red berries that could be really appealing to kids. And if kids eat enough of these, some children have even died eating them. So fatalities are rare, but every time I see them, I pull them down just because it worries me to see them there, usually hanging on a fence somewhere right at kids' eye level. So like like pretty much every other community in North America, probably, Sault Ste. Marie and the area are not immune to invasive plant problems. In the upper left, we have periwinkle, which is one of our worst invasive species. This photograph was taken in the backyard of a friend of mine who lives on Lansdowne Avenue, and her backyard goes down to a ravine, and it's just a massive carpet of periwinkle as far as the eye can see. At the upper left, we have goutweed, which most gardeners are familiar with and don't like because it is very difficult to get rid of. This particular patch is growing from a backyard on 4th Line into the bush off of there. In the lower left, we have lily of the valley, another one that many people don't realize is invasive. This patch of lily of the valley is moving from a backyard on Irwin here in Sault Ste. Marie into the natural area behind the former Sir James Dunn High School site. And then we also have at the lower right, yellow archangel, another ground cover. And this one was dumped in a big pile of yard waste in the east end of Sault Ste. Marie. And you can see what's happened. There's a large sea of yellow archangel growing out from this yard waste dump. So this is something that I ask everyone to reflect upon before considering dumping their yard waste into nearby natural areas, that there's a good chance you're going to give some invasive species a lift. There are some other invasives that are poised to create problems in our area that I think are worth pointing out. One is Phragmites. This is one of the worst invasive species in the Great Lakes and one of the worst in Canada overall. You can see how tall and thick it grows down by Point Pelee on Lake Erie. It's a huge issue. It interferes with boating and navigation. It changes water levels. It destroys habitat for turtles and other aquatic creatures. It's really bad. And my understanding is that there have been some sightings of it this far north. Japanese barberry is another one. Probably nobody in the Sioux thinks it's invasive, but this particular patch of Japanese barberry is actually growing in Marquette, Michigan. So it can become invasive even in our climate. And a good reason to pull out your Japanese barberry is that it provides a fantastic microclimate for the black-legged tick, which is the tick that causes Lyme disease. Lyme disease carrying ticks love barberry, so that's a good reason to get rid of it. Japanese hogweed, probably most people have heard of. As far as I know, it's not in Sault Ste. Marie yet, but the Sioux Golf Club reported having it. I'm not convinced until I see actual documented evidence, but we'll find out next spring. And then at the far left, we have Norway maple. That's another one that probably a lot of people in this area don't know is invasive, but it's the worst invasive species in Toronto. It's taken over their ravine ecosystems there, and it creates ecological deserts where birds don't go because there's no native insects, and the dominoes just keep falling from there. We are in a much better position than Southern Ontario and many parts of the US in terms of invasive species, and prevention is much cheaper than remediation. So keep that in mind. So moving on to native plants, I really wanted to tackle the issue of what is a native plant, because as I was preparing for this talk and preparing for doing some writing about winter sowing, it's really that the whole issue of what's a native plant is challenging. It's surprisingly complicated. So the definition of a native plant is one that grows naturally in a given area without humans having introduced it. It evolved here over thousands of years. It's adapted to our growing conditions. It's symbiotic with our creatures. So, examples like red columbine, white trillium, Joe Pye weed, blue bead lily. These are all common native plants around here. They've been here for a very long time. We're all very clear that these are native plants. So this is where things start to get complicated. So plants can be sometimes referred to as native plants, and they're native, but they're just maybe not native to here. So at the upper left, we have Manitoba maple, which is native to the prairies, but not here. And it is actually considered an invasive species in some parts of Ontario. There's a little bit of controversy over whether or not it's actually an invasive species, but there are places where parts of Ontario, they really don't want you planting them, or they want you to cut them down. In the upper right, we have blazing star, which is a beautiful native plant that's native only to a tiny part of southwestern Ontario. So most of Ontario, it's not a native plant, but it grows well in northern Ontario, and our pollinators love it. So, is it wrong to plant it? No, but to say it's native to Sault Ste. Marie, it's not. It's native to this part of North America, just not up here. In the lower left-hand corner, we have pink turtlehead, which is a beautiful plant. I actually have this in my yard. The bees love it, but it's native to Appalachia. And we have a native form of this plant here in Ontario called white turtlehead, which is harder to find. But if you can find that one, I would recommend that one, since that's what's native to here. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with having the pink turtlehead. It's just the white one is the one that's native to our area. And I just had to throw in a photograph of a magnolia, which is, I have 4 magnolia trees because I'm a little crazy. And no, they're not native to Ontario, but they don't do any harm here. I mean, they barely survive here. So, it's once again, it's not terrible. They're native to the southern US. It's not terrible to have them here, but they're just not part of our ecosystems. So there's also further confusion added to the whole native plant question in terms of what's a wildflower versus what's a native plant. So a wildflower is simply a flower that grows in the wild. It can be native, it can be non-native, it can even be invasive. In fact, all 4 of these flowers that you see in these photos, Himalayan balsam, yellow flag iris, oxeye daisy, and musk mallow, these all grow in the wild, but here in Ontario, but they're considered invasive species. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Just because you see something that's growing abundantly in the wild, it doesn't mean it's a native plant. But it might be referred to as a wildflower by some people. So another layer of complexity is the whole issue of cultivars of native plants. So some people call these nativars. So it's when breeders take a native plant and they breed new varieties for desirable features like flower color, fragrance, disease resistance, or cold hardiness. So these are not native. Sorry about the double negative, but they tend to be less useful to our pollinators, birds, and other wildlife. So for example, our eastern red columbine is best suited to our pollinators with the roughly, the super roughly hybrid varieties. They tend to be more difficult for pollinators to burrow their way into. And with coneflower, there's actually been research that's been done that has shown that cultivated varieties are not as useful to pollinators, birds, and other wildlife. So that's something to keep in mind when you're deciding what you want to grow from seed. Nativars are generally less useful than the actual native plant itself. Further complementing things, and I did want to just touch on this so that people don't think that they can't ever plant anything that's not native. Hostas is a group of plant, not native, but they do not cause ecological harm. They're not escaping into our natural areas. They tend to be, yeah, they're a little bit spready, but they're not invasive. They don't, like, you don't go around town and go into natural areas and see them growing everywhere. So I just wanted to mention this so that people don't leave with the impression they can never put anything that's not a native plant in their yard. Common orange daylily, on the other hand, is considered an invasive species in many parts of North America. It can be quite spready. It sends out the creeping rootstock and suddenly you have plants coming up everywhere. But if you like daylilies, the daylily cultivars are generally not invasive. So that's an option if you really like daylilies. So the bottom line, to guide you in choosing what plants you want to winter sow, ask yourself, what is my objective? Do I want to mimic nature as closely as possible, restore ecosystem? Do I want to support pollinators to some extent, but I don't necessarily have to have like a perfect recreation of an ecosystem in my yard? Or if I'm just looking for lots of biodiversity and lots of color. So make a plan, know your objectives, and do your homework. And that will help you decide what to grow. So this is a highly simplified decision tool that I put together. The optimal, obviously, to optimize benefits to nature is up here, where you have plants that are native species to your region. And down here, the seed source is also local. Because if you grow plants from seeds that are from local sources, they will be genetically best adapted to our climate and growing conditions. So this is really the optimal right here. Now, if you, the issue with this is, especially for people who live in more remote areas like Northern Ontario, it's not like we have a huge number of native plant nurseries and native plant seed sellers, so it can be challenging. So if you're in here or in here, and you're getting your, you have native plants that are close or seed sources that are closer, that's okay. What you really want to avoid is down here where you're, getting seeds from another continent for invasive species. But this just gives you an idea of where the sweetest spot is and where you want to avoid. And then in here, it's a little bit more of a gray area, and it's really up to you to decide how far you want to go, how purist you want to be. Uh-oh, one of my photos disappeared. So another criteria that can enter into your decision in terms of what to plant is the function of that plant in the ecosystem. So for example, some insects are generalists, and they can, like bumblebees, can make use of many plants, but there are other ones that are very specialist. And you might want to do some homework and say, commit to helping a given species. For example, there's a global push to help the monarch butterfly, and I don't know what happened to my swamp milkweed photo. Canva ate it, evidently. But most of us are aware of the symbiotic relationship between monarch butterflies and various types of milkweed. But there's other ones that have these types of relationships as well. For example, in the center, we have the two-leaved toothwort, which is the main host plant for the West Virginia white butterfly. And this is a species of special concern here in Ontario. And at the far left, we have black-eyed Susan, which have a special relationship with the silvery checker spot butterfly. The former lay their eggs on black-eyed Susan, and the leaves are the main food source. So this is just something else. If you want to go that extra mile and maybe support a specialist insect of some kind, you could do a little homework and come up with some species that you really would like to hone in on there. So there's more on the complex issue of what's a native plant on the Clean North website. I put together this blog post. So if you're not taking notes, you can always go to our website and read up on it further there. Okay, on to the fun stuff. So I got into winter sowing because I wanted to offer a positive alternative to invasive species. I didn't want to be just wagging my finger at people and nagging them to stop growing invasives, stop buying invasives, get rid of your invasives. I wanted to have something that would be positive for them to look forward to. So growing native plants helps nature and our local ecosystem, which is great. But also you can have a spectacular garden with native plants, or at least more native plants. And I'm offering up 12 species to consider here. So top row at the far left, we have Joe Pye weed, which is one of my favorite plants. It has a long blooming period. Mine is still blooming right now. It attracts a whole variety of pollinators. Even monarch butterflies will go onto it. Then we have the red columbine, and then across the purple anise hyssop, which is a lovely plant that has fragrant leaves that some people make into tea. It's licorice scented, and it's covered with pollinators. The bees and other critters just love it. At the far right, we have gray-headed coneflower, which is a really interesting one. We have at the next row, far left, we have black-eyed Susan and swamp milkweed, which I've already talked about. Then the smooth oxeye sunflower. That one is great. Again, lots of pollinators love it. It gets really tall and it has a really long blooming period. Like it's blooming from mid-July to maybe even late September. I mean, it's just a great flower. And at the far right, we have smooth asters, which mine are still blooming, which is, I mean, it's Northern Ontario in mid-October. So it's amazing to see them still blooming. Lower left, we have purple coneflower, which I've already mentioned, the great blue lobelia, which is a wonderful shade flowering plant, one of the few really vivid plants that will bloom well in the shade. Culverroot, the white one, that one was new to me a couple of years ago. It is probably the most pollinators per square inch of any plant in my garden. It is literally vibrating with life all the time. And it's really, I had great success winter sowing it. The seeds are really easy to collect. And then at the far right, we have red cardinal flower. So a key issue for those hoping to plant more natives is finding native plants can be tough. And it is important to be aware that sometimes garden center staff may not realize which plants are not actually native or even invasive. So before you buy, always check online. Here in Sault Ste. Marie, New North greenhouses often has native plants. Canadian Tire used to have a native plant display. I visited it every year. This year they didn't have it, and that was really disappointing. There are some companies that will ship native plants through the mail to you if you live in a more remote area like I do, where we don't have all these native plant nurseries hanging around. There's a great one in Ontario called Ontario Native Plant Nursery. They do a fabulous job of shipping plants. I ordered, oh God, I probably ordered 40 plants from them and they all arrived healthy. So what's an aspiring native plant gardener to do under these circumstances? I found my answer to the native plant sourcing dilemma to be winter sowing. This past winter, my husband and I sowed about 125 jugs, and this allowed us to produce, I'm going to say, at least 1,000 plants for the price of a large bag of soil. So many that I couldn't even retrieve them all and lost a bunch to rotting and just me not being able to keep track of them all. And this allowed me to donate hundreds of native plants to Clean North, the environmental group I volunteer for, to sell at plant sales and have plenty to also plant in my yard. It was absolutely a fabulous success for us. So what is winter sowing? Winter sowing is sowing seeds in mini greenhouses placed outside in winter and then opened in the spring. Why winter sow? The reason for this is to germinate, most native plant seeds need a period of moist cold that is known as stratification. Stratification is a plant defense mechanism. It prevents seeds from breaking dormancy and sprouting during that thaw in January we usually get. Imagine if seeds germinated as soon as they fell off the plant in the fall, or like I said, in that thaw in mid-January. Most of the resulting seedlings would die quickly because they wouldn't have enough root mass to sustain them through another period of cold. There are actually 2 other winter sowing methods besides the one in containers, but I'm not going to focus on those tonight. I will tell you just a little bit about each of them. So some people sow native plant seeds directly on the ground in fall. Or you can put it on a light layer for those of us who live, we have snow all winter long. So if there's a light layer of snow, you can just put them down on top of the snow in the place you want them to germinate. The downside of this is that you have a lot less control. You have a lot less control over whether or not the seeds rot or get eaten by birds or get eaten by insects. And so I wanted something with more control. Other people use the refrigerator method where you put seeds on moist paper towels and seal them in Ziploc bags. That was a bit too fussy for me. I looked at trying to plant these without breaking those little shoots off, and I don't have room in my fridge either. And also for me living in Northern Ontario, I have this refrigerator outside my door with unlimited storage for several months in the winter. So it didn't make sense to me to do the fridge method. But the principles are the same. You're giving those seeds that period of moist cold. So the first step really is to get your hands on some seeds. Where do you get them? So you can collect them yourselves, but please do this ethically. Recognize that in parks and protected areas, it's illegal to collect seeds. If you're collecting on private land, make sure you have permission. And it's recommended that you don't take more than 10% of the seeds from a given stand of plants so that that stand will be able to perpetuate itself. Here in Northern Ontario, we have a fabulous wildflower seed company called Northern Wildflowers. I highly recommend them. They have a terrific variety of native plant seeds for Northern Ontario, so do check them out. Here in Sault Ste. Marie, there's a small outfit called the Superior Gardener. She has some native plant seeds. You can also buy seeds from other Canadian seed sellers. For example, OS Seeds in Southern Ontario or West Coast Seed out on the West Coast. But once again, wherever you live, see if you can find somebody that's selling local seeds in your area first, and then kind of move out concentrically from there. So when you collect seed, this is a bit of an art rather than a science. It's kind of like Goldilocks. You don't want it too soon. You don't want it too late. You want it when it's just right. With milkweed, it's pretty easy. You just wait for the pods to split. Once the pods start to split, then you can just toss them in a paper bag. With plants like Joe Pye weed and asters, they get kind of fluffy, like the plant in the second row there in the middle. You can see it's got like little almost dandelion looking fluff heads. So when it's fluffy like that, that's when you want to collect them. If you get there too late, the fluff will all be gone. With plants like coneflowers and black-eyed Susan, you want the petals to be dead, the top parts of the stem to be dead, but you don't want all the seeds to be gone once again. So that just gives you an idea. And like for me, I'm working on a project with milkweed, so I'm being very rigorous about collecting my milkweed seed. I go every 2 days so that I don't miss any, because you just never know when they're going to pop open. So I'm probably going to have been collecting over 3 weeks. I keep going back to my milkweed patches and collecting. This is on my property, so I can take as much as I want. So in terms of storing, I usually store in paper. So for large seed heads, especially to start, if I don't have time to clean them right away, I'll put them in a lunch bag or like a paper grocery bag. For smaller seeds or smaller seed heads, I might use an envelope, either a regular business envelope, or you can order online from Amazon. I've gotten large containers of coin envelopes, which are really good for small seeds, or if you want to share seeds or trade seeds with others. So those are some of the types of, and also the glassine envelopes that are used when you buy stamps, those are also can be used for seeds, but avoid putting them in plastic, and make sure that they're stored in a cool, dark, dry place. Before you store your seeds, it's a good idea to remove as much of the chaff as possible. The chaff is the non-seed parts of the plant that end up in with your seeds. You don't have to get every single bit of it out, but just recognize that the more you get out of it, the less likely you're going to have things like mold growing on your seeds. There are many strategies for cleaning seed faster. I just learned the other day that you can use a salad spinner to clean milkweed seed. You just put the fluffy things in, spin it around, and it separates the seeds, drop to the bottom, and the fluff stays inside the inner basket of the salad spinner. You can also use various sizes of spice jars to shake out tiny seeds and not the chaff. Another strategy is to take a couple of bowls outside on a breezy day and pour them from one bowl to another, and then the breeze kind of blows the chaff away. Sieves can be very handy. I found that window screening material worked fabulous for, it was the right, perfect, what's the word I'm looking for? Perfect size holes for columbine seed. And then another strategy is just to fold a piece of paper. So I wanted to clean some columbine seed, and I just put it on the fold and then very gently blew, and most of the chaff blew off. But you gotta be really careful. You need to be very controlled, otherwise you'll end up with seed all over your house. And pro tip, do not open bags of milkweed seed inside, because if you do, you will spend the next hour running around the house with a vacuum, vacuuming up all the fluff. In fact, if you take it outside and open it, it's kind of entertaining, because it'd be a fun thing for your kids to do, because then it's suddenly snowing. So there's more on how to collect native plant seed for sowing this fall and winter on the Clean North blog, cleannorth.org. So you don't have to memorize all the information about collecting native plant seed. The information is all documented there. So can I winter sow non-native plants and vegetables? Absolutely, but you need to look this up and do some homework first. Check, whether it's appropriate for your specific species, because for some non-native plants or, annuals, it just doesn't confer much of an advantage. So it's really not worth doing. And of course, always make sure that you're not starting an invasive species. So my top advice for winter sowing non-native plants and vegetables is just check online and see whether or not it's worthwhile. Can you winter sow shrubs and trees? Yes, but I'm not the best person to teach you how to do this, because I had terrible luck with it. I'm not sure what happened, but one thing I've learned is that some species of shrubs and trees can have very long germination periods. So for example, viburnum has an 18-month germination period. So that's after winter sowing. Then it has to, you have to keep it in a pot and water it, and then, or plant it, and then you have to remember to water it. And 18 months, wow, that's a big commitment. Plus, when it comes down to it, I mean, what would I winter sow up here? White spruce, cedar? We've got a lot of that, and you can start them in your yard. You don't really need to start them with winter sowing. So I have them coming up in my yard. So okay, on to containers. So what containers can you use for winter sowing? Anything that's clear plastic is fair game. The larger the jug, usually the better. So you can use juice jugs, vinegar jugs, 2-liter pop bottles. Clear is better. In the United States, the most common winter sowing container used is the milk jug, but here in Ontario, we don't have clear milk jugs. We have very few milk jugs, and the ones we do have here in the Soo are not clear, they're white. So we had to use other things. And what we ended up using a lot of actually was windshield wiper fluid jugs, because we traveled in January and we stopped at a gas station on the highway, and they had this huge bin full of all these empty windshield fluid jugs. And I looked it up. The fluid is water soluble. You can just rinse them well, and they're safe to use for winter sowing. But plastic bins are another one. Ask your friends and relatives, hey, you got any plastic bins with cracks in them that you can't really use anymore, but you don't want to throw away? Because cracks are fine. So you might be able to scrounge some from people you know. So what must jugs have? The important thing for these jugs is you need to have holes at the top so that rain and snow can get in. So you want to drill holes around the spout, and you want to throw the caps to the jugs away. the graphic little holes I put on here are a little bit large. You don't really want them super big. You want them big enough that moisture can actually get in, but not so big that, you know, a mouse could squeeze their way in. In addition, you want to cut the jug at around the 5-inch mark at the bottom. And you want to leave a 3-inch stretch at the far right underneath the handle so that it will act as a hinge. And then you also want to slash an X across the jug bottom for drainage. So this is really important. Err on the side of more drainage, because I found the jugs really hung on to water in the spring, and I did lose some seedlings to rotting. So keep that in mind. Same thing with the bins. They need to have holes in the top so that moisture can get through. They probably don't need to be this big. If somebody I volunteer with in Clean North has access to a bunch of plastic bins that have good sized holes in the lids, like big holes in the lids, and he's going to use screening so that moisture can get in, but you can still use them for winter sowing. The other thing is with bins, as long as they're clear bins, you can use bins that have not clear lids, like the opaque lids, like a blue lid or a green lid. Those are fine. You'll just need to take them off in the spring so that they can get more light. But it really, I mean, they spend most of their time, you know, it doesn't matter that there's no light. So we didn't have any problems with the bins with not clear lids, as long as they got some light. And once again, the drainage in the bottom. So this is a potential spring shortcut that I might try this year. One of the things I found is I really felt like I needed to transplant my seedlings into individual pots because I couldn't get them in the ground right away. And some of them, I just wanted to grow them up so that I could donate them and sell them. And so this year, what I might try doing is getting plastic bins and putting the pots in the plastic bins and only having, you know, a lesser number of seeds in each so that I don't have to repot them in the spring. My suggestion to you is try some both ways and see which you like better. What if you hate plastic? So some people just really want to minimize the amount of plastic they're bringing into their yard. If you already have plant pots, you can just sow the seeds directly in pots and then put a wooden or brick frame around it and tack hardware cloth on top to help keep the critters out. Now, critters may still be able to get into this if they're able to tunnel under, but you know, it might be worth trying if you really feel like you don't want plastic. And the other thing is you'd have to build this pretty early in Sault Ste. Marie because, you know, it might be buried in snow in, you know, it might be hard to do this in January. So there's lots of different options for the containers you can use. Just ensure that whatever design you use, that you have these things: light, moisture, good drainage, and some kind of protection from critters. So when should I sow? And I'm just going to go back to that previous. So one thing I forgot to mention, we did also use large yogurt tubs and put Ziploc bags over the top, and those worked well also. So those are obviously not clear, but they had a clear Ziploc over the top and they seem to work fine. So keep that in mind as well as another option. So when should you sow? This varies considerably. So milkweed is one of the easiest seeds to get success with. I mean, it only needs 30-day cold period. I had so much milkweed seed last year that I just flung a handful of it into the pile of dirt at the back of my yard. It was coming up in that dirt pile. When I potted up my dahlias, I had dahlia pots on my patio and milkweed was growing in those, and I would pluck them out and repot them. I had milkweed coming up everywhere. So milkweed is a really easy one. Culver root needs 90 days stratification cold period. So for living in Sault Ste. Marie, we have long winters. So we did our winter sowing at the end of January, early February, and that worked out well for us. If you live in a much milder climate, you might need to back that up some. So what soil should you use? As with any seed starting, I recommend you use potting soil, commercial potting soil, not soil from your yard, because it's going to be less prone to things like fungal diseases. And you might consider getting your potting soil now, as it could be difficult depending on where you live and what your season is like. It might be more difficult to get potting soil in January. So how do you fill the containers? I recommend filling them about 4 inches deep with soil, and you want to level the soil a bit, you know, so that it's not like all kind of up and down hilly. You want it nice and flat, and you want it moist but not soggy. How many seeds per container, or how densely should you put the seeds in? Well, this is really up to you. I have heard that native plant seeds like to be crowded because, for example, with milkweed, or, you know, what are some other ones? You know, the seeds might fall in a big clump. Joe Pyeweed, they got those big seed heads. Somebody knocks, you know, a bird or something knocks one of the seed heads to the ground. You might get 15 plants all growing in the same place. In terms of density, it's really up to you. We had 125 jugs and we had a ton of seed. So we were very liberal. We just put like a really good layer of seed across all the surfaces and let her rip, because we just had a wealth of both. We had a lot of work to do with all these jugs, and we had a ton of seeds. If you don't have that much seed, you might want to be more parsimonious and, you know, do it in like nice, neat little rows. So it'll be easier to separate later. It's really up to you. Try different things and see what works well for you. One thing you should look up is every type of seed is different in terms of how deep it likes to be planted and whether or not it likes soil on the top. It really just depends. Sometimes with little tiny seeds, you're just kind of supposed to lay them on top and press them in and not put soil on top of them. We put soil on top of all of our seeds because we were, like I said, this was an assembly line. We didn't have time to individuate. But if your project is smaller, you might be able to do that. So the final step is to tape the jugs shut, put the lids on the bins, make sure you remember those precipitation and drainage holes, and mark what species it is on the jug. And this is important. Don't write the species on the tape, because if the tape falls off, or in the spring when you pull the tape off, you won't know what's in there. Learn from my mistake. Labeling is important. There are now special garden markers. I found some on Amazon. Sharpies are not permanent. I don't care what they say, they are not permanent. So you really need a specialized permanent garden marker. Some people say paint markers work really well. So get something that is known to be actually waterproof and weatherproof. Where do you put your containers? So this is important. I recommend you put them in the shade to prevent early germination if there's a thaw in midwinter, and also to prevent heat damage if you get an early spring. In addition, don't put them under a roof overhang, or a gazebo or anything like that, because you want the precipitation to be able, the snow or the rain, to get into the jugs. In addition, you want it out of the way of foot traffic and pet traffic and snow blowers. So you really want it in a place where it's not going to get knocked over. You may consider bracing it to prevent tipping. We had some of our jugs, you know, we get so much snow here that the snow can kind of upend things. And when the snow melted, some of our jugs had kind of fallen over. So there was a little bit of a mess there. When do you check your jugs? So when daytime temperatures start going above freezing, that's when you might want to start taking peeks in your jugs. And when they're consistently above freezing, then you really want to crack them open to prevent them from rotting or cooking. And you kind of got to take some special care with them until all danger of frost is gone. Now with me, we made the mistake of the soil level was really quite a bit lower than the cut line on the jugs. So that was a problem because the jugs really held on to moisture. And so we did lose some of our plants to, I think, either rotting or fungal diseases or something like that. But the advantage of that was they were a little bit more protected from frost. What I would probably do, what I will do next year, is I will make sure that the soil level is a little bit higher. And I will just be very cautious about where I put them in my yard in the spring to make sure that they're in a protected, sheltered location where they're not going to get frosted, or, you know, put the covers back over them if it's going to be a really cold night. And for spring, the ideal climate is probably morning sun and afternoon shade, because then warms up a little bit in the morning, but not so much that it's going to get cooked. So when can you take the next step? Don't do anything until the first set of true leaves have emerged for the seedlings, because they just don't deal with transplantation or any kind of mucking around until then. Once you have the first set of true leaves, plant starts photosynthesizing. And remember, these are native plants, so they can take a bit of stress. Then you can start doing your transplanting and thinning. So what do I do with this pan of brownies? With the larger containers, this is kind of what I felt like I was dealing with, because when you have a whole bunch of plants growing clustered together, they kind of stay in clumps. They hold together in clumps. So you have a few options. One is you can take a spatula, cut this into brownies, and plant as little seedling bunches, either in pots to grow up further or in the ground, and then just leave it to Darwin, leave it to natural selection to sort out who wins. So I did this especially with plants that seem to really have high germination rates, like great blue lobelia. I had lots and lots of seedlings, and I was like, there's no way I can separate these. It's just going to be too difficult. So I just let them fight it out. You can, depending on the species, you can try separating them out and plant them in pots or in the ground. The third option is you can just let them sit for a while. If you're busy or you don't have time to deal with them, you can just leave them in the pots for a while. So with smaller containers, you can kind of flip them over like you would be transplanting, and it should come out as mostly a clump. And then you can just break it into sections or pull the seedlings apart. So we did a mix. We left some in containers, then planted them directly later. And then we repotted some clumps as well. And then we also separated some into individual seedlings and repotted them individually. So my husband Bill here is repotting smooth asters. Those seemed very easy to separate. Another one was smooth oxeye sunflower. They were relatively easy to pull apart and replant. So it worked both ways for us. Like, we had clumps that we grew up and they're doing fine, and we had ones that we separated and they did fine as well. But the nice thing about separating them for us was, like I said, we were able to donate hundreds of seedlings to Clean North to sell. So that was an advantage of that. It's helpful to work with the soil slightly dry. You don't want it really soggy when you're trying to separate the seedlings or the chunks of seedlings. I mentioned a spatula if you want to just cut it into brownies and plant those, or sometimes you can use a plastic fork or just kind of gently tease the plants apart. A caveat though is that once you've got them out and separated and you're waiting to plant them, do keep mist the roots with a water bottle, keep those moist, because dried out roots are that really stresses seedlings. And just as a further measure of protection, after we repotted the ones that we were donating to Clean North, we put them in shade for a week, just so that they would not get too stressed out by our lovely warm May that we had. Was it May or June? I can't remember. Anyway, we had a very beautiful spring. It's real. So where do you plant your native plants once you're ready to plant them? It's really important to match the species to the site. Native plants vary a lot in requirements. Some do well with occasional flooding, like swamp milkweed, Joe Pye weed. Some will not tolerate it, their roots will rot. Some love shade, like great blue lobelia, black cohosh. Some need tons of sun and don't do well in shade at all. And a major caveat that I learned growing native plants is that they can get really tall. I have been surprised by how tall native plants get. A lot of them are like 6-7 feet tall, and they can get kind of floppy over. So when you're planting that, keep that in mind, and maybe think about planting them at the back of the garden bed, depending on the species. Columbine is a little bit more well-mannered that way, but like my New England asters, the smooth asters, the Joe Pye weed, the culver root, they all get incredibly tall. So keep that in mind when you're deciding where to plant. Another caution is that native plants grown through winter sowing are hardy, but they're not necessarily carefree. So you imagine, you know, one of the reasons these plants produce so many seeds is because it's kind of like, you know, you've seen the videos of all the sea turtles that hatch from eggs and then they make a break for the ocean and most of them don't make it. Well, this is the same thing, right? A lot of them don't make it. If you want the best bang for your buck in terms of your effort, if you want the greatest success, you need to pay attention to them and take care of them. They may need, you know, pretty close attention for a year or two. And also it can take a couple of years for them to flower. The only ones that I think we saw, there were 3 that we saw flowering this year, the anisotap, the smooth oxeye sunflower, and the smooth asters. Oh, and some of the great blue lobelia. So actually we had quite a few that actually were blooming in the first year. So that was kind of neat. Okay, to sum things up, what do winter sowed plants need? They need a 30 to 90 day period of moist cold. You need to ground truth that online or in a guide of some kind. They need clean soil. They need access to light. They need access to precipitation. They need excellent drainage. And they need some protection from drying out, from rotting, from critters, from traffic, and from spring cooking. In addition, after transplanting, they need some tending when they go into the individual pots or into the ground in your yard or wherever it is that you're planting them. And finally, they need the right planting site. Make sure that you're putting them in a place where they're going to do well with that soil. It's clay. Some plants love clay soil, some plants hate it. So do pay attention to that. So these are all photos from my garden. If you're an avid flower gardener like I am, I like to show people that you can have a beautiful, colorful, amazing garden with native plants. My garden is absolutely a pollinator mecca. So like I said, we do have a lot of this documented on the Clean North website. And Kensington Conservancy is recording this session, so you'll be able to access the recording afterwards. If you need any reminders, you can go to our blog. We actually have a new page that lists all of our links to how to be a greener gardener, so you can check that out as well. Okay, so I'd like to end by thanking all the participants, by thanking the Kensington Conservancy, but most of all, thanking my husband, Bill Cole, who was my main winter sowing partner. He did a lot of the grunt work. He did a lot of the jug filling. He's not a gardener, but he supports me, and I really appreciate all his help. And so we can open it up to questions.
Okay, thanks, Abby. That was fantastic. I learned a lot myself as well. I'll start with the questions that came in to the chat throughout the presentation. So one of your pictures showed blue jugs. Are those okay to use, although they're not clear? Okay, yes, I'm sorry. That's a problem with graphics of jugs. None of those are actually blue. They're clear. They're intended to be clear. So when something is clear, it sometimes doesn't show up very well in presentations. So trust me, all those jugs were meant to be clear. So just so you know. Okay, great. If you live in an apartment with a balcony, but there is a balcony overhead, would you be able to winter sow, and how would you work around them not getting in the rain and snow? Yeah, you would just want to, every time it snowed or rained, you know, I would probably just grab up some snow and rain and, or, you know, maybe keep, what I would try to do is mimic what's happening in nature. So if you live in a snowy climate and you get snow, I would dump a pile of snow on top of the jug. What you want to avoid is having it dry out completely. It needs moist cold for 30 to 90 days. So that's the thing that you want to, that's the thing you want to make sure you do, is that you get that 30 to 90 days for that stratification period. So I actually kept a couple of pots in my garage
because I kind of wanted to, that they weren't winter sowed, they were cuttings that I had taken, and they actually didn't survive because I don't think I watered them enough. So that is something to be wary of, is that you just don't want it to dry out completely.
Do you have the Latin name for the smooth oxeye sunflower?
Yes, it is, just looking it up, it's Helianthus. Hang on just a second. Helianthus, the second name starts with an H. I can't remember what it's called. Helianthus. Hang on just a sec. Sorry. Helianthus, sorry, Heliopsis helianthoids, smooth oxeye sunflower. Heliopsis, I can't say it, Heliopsis helianthoids.
I struggle with scientific names, Latin names as well.
Yep.
Tricky. Okay, next, how do you prevent spring cooking without massive moving of all your jugs?
I just popped them open. I had so many that I didn't worry about it. So I just popped them open. So I, took a risk that I mean, they are native plants, right? So once it was consistently above freezing during the day, I took the tops off.
Do you put your jugs into containers?
No, I did not do that. I do not do that. But if you did that for some reason, like some people put milk jugs into milk crates because that's offers an extra measure of protection in terms of tipping. But no, I don't put them into containers.
Would clear clamshells from salads or berries be a good option too?
Yes. What I recommend you do, I didn't use that method. There are people who have, so if you just Google it, you'll be able to find people who've used that successfully. Yes.
Does a portion of the jug always need to be exposed to light? What happens if a heavy snowfall buries the containers?
Nope. I live in a place that gets up to 14 feet of snow every winter. So ours were buried, like they were buried. We put them out in late January, early February, and they were completely covered with snow. So really the light is more critical towards the end of the cold period when the seeds are starting to wake up. They need that period of moist cold for 30 to 90 days. And then when spring comes, that's when they want to wake up after they've had that cold period. And that's when they really need the light. So them being buried in the snow is not a problem.
Can you use clamshell produce containers as seed tray and then put them inside a larger rectangular container?
Yep, as long as there's moisture going in and drainage going out.
Do you have any suggestions for moving or resowing perennial poppy seeds?
I haven't done that, but I'm going to this year. So I haven't tried that one yet, but I will. Yeah, if you want to follow up with me through Clean North in late spring, I'll let you know if it worked, because I have some really fabulous poppies that are this gorgeous color of pink, and everybody who comes by is like, I want some of those. So I'm going to see if I can actually get some to grow.
How deep do you put the containers in the snow?
It just on top. So we did it, it was probably 3 feet of snow we put them on, because I'm trying to think. My husband might have snowblowed. We put them on the north side or on the east side of our shed, and he might have snowblowed the snow. And then I don't think it really matters, as long as the problem with putting them on 3 feet of snow is that the snow could melt unevenly and then they could fall over. So if you're able to keep an area shoveled or to brace them somehow, like if you put them in crates of some kind, that would be my only concern, is putting them on top of a snowbank or a deep patch of snow, is that if it melted unevenly, they might tip over.
And the last question I'm seeing in the chat here so far is, how can you kill Japanese knotweed?
Oh, good question. And I actually have an answer, because I know somebody here in Sault Ste. Marie who is taking like a super rigorous approach to this. This is a guy, a young guy, he's a friend of one of my Facebook friends, and he owns a house just a few blocks from me. And all along his driveway was now Japanese knotweed. So what he did, he's, like I said, he's taken a very rigorous approach. He dug it all out, including the roots, and it's impossible to get all of it, but he dug it out. And then he put a tarp over it, and he's going to keep a tarp on it for 2 years. And he goes out there regularly and walks on it to kill any new shoots. So I can't, I mean, this is the really rigorous way to do it. And I've seen pictures in Southern Ontario. And I know there was a naturally in Hamilton, I saw a picture, they got, tarps are expensive. So people are like, I can't afford a tarp to do this. A great idea, especially if you live near boating country, is to get discarded shrink wrap from boats. So in the spring, check with the marina and say, hey, you got any discarded shrink wrap from boats that I could use to get rid of my, but you really do need to keep it covered for 2 years. It's really challenging to get rid of.
This is from someone in Southern Ontario where they don't get a lot of permanent snow. How do you protect them in the winter without the snow?
You don't need to protect them. I mean, you just put them out in, if you live in a place where it rains, you just put them out in the rain. By protect them, I mean, you just want to protect them from tipping, protect them from falling over, from getting, knocked over by kids or your dog. But yeah, you can just put they don't have to be protected by snow as long as they're getting that cold period. And I recognize that if you live in a place that doesn't get a lot of snow, the cold period there is different, and your native plants there are different. So up here, you might not have species down there that have a 90-day requirement for a cold period. It really depends on the species. But yeah, by protection, I just mean you don't want the jug to get knocked over. It'll be fine just sitting in your yard, next, at the back of your yard, underneath a tree, whatever, as long as it's getting moisture and drainage. And I saw there was a thing in the chat, a comment in the chat, that you do need to be careful where you put the jugs to make sure that they do get good drainage. So if you put them in a really wet area where they're going to be sitting and standing in water, that could be a problem.
Why do you have to wait until January when in nature they're in the soil in November?
You don't have to wait till January, but it really depends where you live and when you're motivated to do it. So for me, fall's busy. We got Christmas and whatnot going on. And so I just did it in January because I know I can get my 30 to 90 days in after Christmas. And January is such an awful time of year. It's a really great time to be doing a project like that. But yeah, there's no reason why you can't do it in November or December.
How mature does a plant have to be before you take seed?
It really depends on, how mature does the plant? I see what you're saying. How old it? Well, this is a judgment call. So for example, actually, I don't think it matters. Like, for example, I have a very small black-eyed Susan plant that's sitting in a pot on my patio. And I'm going to, actually it's not a black-eyed Susan, it's a Gloriosa daisy, which is related to black-eyed Susans. And I'm going to take the seed from it because it's a really cool one. I don't care that it's a small plant. It'll be fine next year. Removing the seed head in the fall is not going to harm the plant. It's just more of an issue if you're collecting seed in nature, that you're removing a significant amount of seed from that natural area. So there isn't the same flow of seed going into the ecosystem.
Okay, and one that came in to me directly here, how do you get rid of creeping Charlie?
Creeping Charlie, I can't give you any advice on. That's a really tough one. And it really depends where you are. So here in Ontario, if you're in Ontario, use of residential herbicides is not an option. So the best strategy for lawn weeds is to take care of your lawn. So, do things that optimize the health of your lawn so that the grass outcompetes the weeds. But other than that, like creeping Charlie is a really tough one to get rid of out of your lawn.
So that's all I'm seeing for questions. There's lots of thank yous and everything. One more question just came in. We got a lot of mid periods in the winter, so the ground is not frozen for long periods of time and then freezes again. Any advice?
Yeah, so if you live in a place where, you know, there's more variability, might go above freezing, down. My guess is the native plants in your area are adapted to that. So if it's not, the seeds are not in the deep freeze for the entire 30 days or the entire 60 days or whatever it is, I don't think that that's going to be an issue. Because otherwise, because that's the conditions that those seeds are experiencing in nature as well. So I think that they will probably be just fine. But this is where I would put them, in a shady area, especially if you live in a place where you have more above freezing weather in the winter. This is where I think it's more important to make sure that your containers are in a shady area so that you don't have that as much variability in the temperature.
Okay, one last call for questions in the chat. And I'm not seeing anything, lots of thank yous. Oh,
Same principles for annuals. I can't speak to annuals because it really depends. So if it's a native annual, there are some native annuals. There's one, I can't remember what it's called. Maybe Carter, you can help me. It's pink and yellow. It's a little pink and yellow flower. It looks a little bit like a snapdragon. I can't remember what it's called, but that one's actually an annual. Somebody who has a cottage on St. Joe's Island gave me some seed this fall, and I'm going to try winter sowing it. So that would be the same principle. But if it's an exotic annual, this is where you get into territory where it's like, I'm not sure it's really worth it. If you are, you know, doing zinnias or something like that, you need to look that up online, because it may or may not be worthwhile to winter sow something like zinnias.
great. So yeah, thanks again, everyone, for coming out tonight. This presentation has been recorded, so we'll get it up on the Kensington Conservancy's YouTube page. I will try my best to get that done tomorrow, and then a link to that will be posted on our Facebook page, as well as emailed out to everyone who registered for tonight.
And if anybody has any follow-up questions, if you go to the Clean North website and email Clean North, info@cleannorth.org, I'd be more than happy to answer follow-up questions.
Awesome. Okay, thanks again, Abby. This has been fantastic.
All right, thanks everyone. Happy winter sowing.
Have a good night, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.